Today, we're here to talk about maybe one of the most wasteful, certainly one of the most expensive school districts in American history. And just last week, Jeff Bezos turned some heads in an interview he gave with CNBC's Squawk Box. And there were some things he said in that I thought were silly or wrong. But there was one thing in there that I think is worth considering. He said, if we ran Amazon the way New York City runs their school system, your packages would take 6 weeks to arrive. We'd have to charge you a $100 delivery fee. And then when the package did finally arrive, you'd have the wrong item in it anyway. Now, I get it why nobody wants to be taking lessons from Bezos or any finger wagging, especially given some of the other things he even said in that interview. But I want you to listen to this interview that we have today. And I want you to ask yourself at the end, was Jeff Bezos right about the New York City school system? And in order to help us grapple with that question, I'm inviting on Marc Novicoff, who just wrote a very fascinating article for The Atlantic called A Mediocre Public School Education for Just $40,000 a Pupil, How New York City's Education Budget Became an Untouchable Money Pit. And so when you listen to this interview, it's not just about New York City, it's about progressive governance generally and how we need to be better, and about how the way we even talk about the way we spend money and that the way we educate kids is completely flawed in a lot of cities around the country. And that as we head towards the midterms and the next presidential election, we really need to expect more from our public officials, including my fellow Democrats. So without further ado, let's go in our interview with Marc from The Atlantic. Let's jump right in. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Marc, when you wrote an article a couple of weeks ago, I guess, called A Mediocre Public School Education for Just $40,000 a Pupil, caught my attention and the attention of a lot of people in my life. I'm a product of the New York City public school system, PS 30 and IS 51 in Staten Island. And this article paints a pretty bleak picture of our city's public schools. Let's start where you start, which is the question of cost. How much does it cost to educate a kid in New York City, and just how unprecedented is that spending?
Yeah, so right now they're spending around $42,168 per pupil. So in terms of how unprecedented that is, I mean, they used to spend a lot less. Most other school districts spend a lot less. The last federal comparative data is I think it's 2 or 3 years old. But when that was being done, they were spending 50% more than LA, and they would spend about 150% more, as in 2.5 times as much as Miami, which is the third biggest school district. So
yeah, and so it's pretty unprecedented. And I think starting at a per pupil funding perspective, I think is a good one, because I think the common refrain I hear from people is, it's got more students, so it's going to be more expensive. The other pushback you'd hear is, okay, it's just New York is just a more expensive city. Is there any accounting for, cost of living? Is New York City, did you say how much more than LA per student?
50%, they spend 50% more than LA.
Is New York 50% more expensive to run schools in general?
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. I mean, I'm from Los Angeles. New York is pretty expensive, but I wouldn't say it's 50% more expensive than Los Angeles.
And what's driving these numbers? Why is it so expensive?
Yeah, so there's two things happening. When you have a per pupil number like that, you have the numerator, which is the total spending, and you have the denominator, which are the pupils. The total spending keeps jacking up. It's basically never allowed to go down. A lot of this has to do with small class sizes, with an increasing number of students being classified as disabled and needing more attention. And then on the denominator side, you just have the total number of students just going down year after year. So there were about 1 million students in 2019. There's now 880,000 students. In the next 5 years, they'll be down to 790,000 students or so. 5 years after that, they'll be even lower. So the denominator keeps going down and the numerator keeps going up, and that kind of mechanically makes the number explode.
Yeah, and let's talk about that denominator. The students, where are these students going?
I mean, New York City's been losing during the pandemic, New York City lost a lot of people. I'm sure you can come up with reasons why.
Yeah.
More space, less expensive, those type of reasons. And the people who left are just disproportionately parents of younger children. So the population of under 5-year-olds, I think, dropped 20% in New York City. So I mean, I think it feels like for a lot of parents of young children over the last 6 or so years, the city has just gotten really suffocating in a number of ways. So,
And you talk in your piece about how one of the main culprits here is class sizes. So New York has more instructional staff per student. What is it? 9 students for every 9 students. We have 1 instructional staff member.
yeah, exactly. That's pretty low. So, I mean, if you take the next 80 largest school districts, none of them have smaller. None of them have a smaller student to teacher ratio than that. There's the class sizes are small, and then you also have this increasing percentage of the population that is in class, but also has more attention, or is not even in class and is in kind of a special ed class.
Yeah, and let's hold the special ed discussion for a second there.
Yeah, sure.
But
sorry.
why is I know that they passed a law, right? New York passed a law decreasing class sizes, but Mamdani asked for a bit of a reprieve from that law. How is it that our class sizes are small anyway? Like I thought he was asking to delay implementing that.
Yes. So they passed the law in 2022. It passed like almost unanimously. There are steps along the way that they have to hit. So they have to hit whatever 60% compliance after a year, 80% compliance after 2. I think they were supposed to hit 100% compliance in 2028. But basically, he's only getting a reprieve from kind of the final implementation of that. He's pushing back the final implementation. But there has been some implementation already. And not to preempt the disability stuff, but that also brings that class. There's a class size number, and there's also the pupil to teacher ratio, and those are class size affects the pupil to teacher ratio, but it's not the only thing, because if you have a class of 30 kids, if there's a speech specialist who has to come in, an ADHD specialist and a reading specialist, and you have to have all these people to come in for various extra challenges, then that makes the pupil to teacher ratio smaller without actually affecting that class size number.
Yeah, and my understanding of the research around class size is that it is not a very cost-effective way to drive improvements in student achievement. I don't know if you looked at that literature.
I'm not the most up on literature, but I would say that's also my understanding, is that it can be good, but that other things can also be good, and that this is usually one of the more expensive things. Yeah, I mean, they've had to hire thousands and thousands of teachers to implement this reform. It seems like they're going to hire thousands fewer than they were supposed to under this law, but it's pretty onerous.
And we'll get to the results. Like, if lowering class sizes, were an effective mechanism, we'd see much different results in New York. But we'll also get to that.
Right.
You'd think with these class sizes, with the spending at over $40,000 per student, that the average New York teacher would be making hundreds of thousands of dollars if you just do the math.
Right.
Yet they're not, and they're not making even competitive salaries with some of the surrounding districts around New York City. How is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they'll. So that is what makes them feel squeezed so much. Is like that they do make more than like the average teacher nationwide, certainly, but they certainly don't make the best salaries in the country. There are other cities like Seattle, I mentioned, that pay more. There are southern cities that pay almost as much, and there are much cheaper places to live. And then I think most acutely for them, they have Long Island there that pays more. There's Westchester that pays more.
I think you said Hudson Valley, even some places.
Yes, yeah, Hudson Valley. So for them, they feel like they're losing teachers to those suburban districts, and that's a big problem for them. And the way this all maths out, as it were, is that there's just so many teachers that the total spending is very high on them, but that each individual one doesn't make that much because there have to be so many of them.
Right. Uh, what's going on here? Like the teachers union in New York, the sort of stereotype of the teachers union, and I'm a bit of a skeptic of their role in the lives of our children and whether it's a good role or not. But you would think that their job is to increase the pay of their members. Yeah, and they're very powerful in New York, yet this is the outcome we have. Is it simply a matter of, hey, like, actually, all things being considered, they want more dues paying members, and that's better for them than anything?
I think that they would tell you that pay is paramount, and that's the number one thing for them. I think where it comes into is it's ultimately a negotiation between the teachers unions and the city and the state, and getting increases to pay is hard and expensive, and there are a lot of other things that are less hard and don't appear to be as expensive immediately, like class sizes. So if you can get almost the entire New York State legislature to agree that you should have that New York and only New York City should have smaller class sizes, then that's one thing that you can get, and it makes to steelman them for a second. I mean, it does make their job easier. I've known teachers. My sister was a teacher. When you are teaching 30 students, that is harder than teaching 25 students. There's more mouths to feed, as it were. So I think it for them, it's like one of the things that they can ask that isn't pay that makes their life easier and is easier to get from a state legislature or a city council.
Well, let's talk about that special education piece that you talked about. So there are kind of two related things going on here, from what I understand. One is increased identification of students as special ed. And then we have a very special category of students leaving the system and getting pretty sizable checks to do so. So let's do that in order. Give us the numbers here, like number of students, percentage of students in New York who are on some form of IEP compared to what we saw decades ago.
Yeah. So in 2000, it was about 11%. Now it's 22%, so it's doubled. And I think that you and me and most people who study this know that the New York City's kids did not get twice as disabled, right? There are not actually twice as many students who are disabled. So it does come down to a widening definition of the term disabled that includes more and more students. And it's fairly obvious that this is not, one-to-one with biology, because of that increase, but also there's some conspicuous stuff going on with gender. Boys are twice as likely to be classified as disabled. And I think that it's not true that 2 times as many boys are disabled. Latino and Asian students are way more likely to get classified as having a speech or language disability than white or black students, which is probably because not as many of them speak English as a first language. So I think there's more than enough evidence to suggest that, I'm not saying there's something nefarious going on. I believe that most people most people causing that increase believe they're doing good, are working on an individual level and saying this student needs more attention. And so there's no conspiracy, but it has ticked up a ton over time for reasons that are very difficult to explain biologically.
Well, and how would this compare both in terms of the raw percentage of students with disabilities and the potential increase over time with other comparable school districts, LA, for example?
Yeah, so in LA, about 16% are disabled. In Chicago, it's like 17. I mean, nationwide, it's 15. So it is. New York is a lot higher. That's 50% higher than average. But it has gone up a lot.
Remind me, what was
everywhere.
the number in New York?
22.
Right. So 1 out of every almost 4 students in a classroom are disabled in some way. Which, if you just think about it as a plain reading, right? Like simple talk, right? Like, and you're saying like, let's create a category of people who are exceptional in their need. Not just from a deficits perspective, they need more reading, they need more math, but they need specialization. And we're going to call it special. But yet 1 out of every 4 of those students are quote unquote special in that way. it just doesn't survive contact with common sense to
Right.
me.
Right.
You
And it's
know?
also, it's also it's a little bit of a strange way to describe students who are struggling, right? Like it's not, like if you have students who are struggling, it doesn't really seem like the right idea to be like, they're disabled, something's wrong with them. Like that's like, if it's happening to a quarter of the students or a tiny bit less, then there's probably nothing wrong with the huge percentage of them. They're probably struggling. And so you have a population that is struggling, and you've always had a population that is struggling. Redefining them as disabled helps in the short run to get them some extra attention, which is the goal of everybody participating in that. It's the goal of the parents. It's the goal of the teachers. It's the goal of the person giving the diagnosis, is like, this kid needs more attention. In the aggregate, those kids are not all of them have disabilities. At least not in, as you say, the common sense reading of the term.
And I imagine this has a hefty price tag associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact number, but it's billions of dollars. They don't separate it out because I think it'd be ugly to look at, and I don't think that it may not even be helpful too. So they never separate it out.
Well, there was another stream of funding. We actually did an episode on this a couple of years ago when Chalkbeat did I think a 2-part series on this phenomenon of students who receive funding from the city of New York in order to leave the system and seek special education services outside of the city. Give us this background.
Yeah, so it's a 1993 case called Carter, and the ruling was that if your local school district is not giving your disabled child, the kind of care that they deserve, then you have a right to public funding for private services for that student. There's this can only be litigated. Basically, that's the only way that you could come to a absolute conclusion that the school district is not doing enough for that kid. De Blasio, as mayor, instituted a policy that he was saying, we're spending too much on the lawyers. Like, that's the waste. We're spending so much on these lawyers who are arguing with each other about how disabled the kid is, and it's a waste. And so we're going to approve most of these without contesting them with fancy lawyers. And since then, it's really just totally ballooned. So I think it was $200 million in 2015. The proposed budget for next year has it at $1.5 billion. So it's like 10,000 or so students. They're each getting about $102,000 to pay for private services. And to be clear, as I said about the litigation part, like, these are parents who have hired lawyers. They are generally well resourced, and it's a pretty difficult problem to solve because, as De Blasio said, like, the only way that you fight these lawyers is by, like, getting more lawyers. Yeah. So it's a bit of a messed up system, but it is absolutely costing New York an insane amount of money. And as you say, they're not actually in the system. And if the system also has so many disabled kids, such that 22% of the system is disabled kids, you'd think that there would be somewhat robust enough environment for disabled kids in the system that you wouldn't have to pay over $1 billion to private schools.
Yeah, and if there ever was a district that would handle Carter case as well, it would be a place like New York, which is so big, right? If you're a small town, I used to be a charter school principal. When we would have kids in Tennessee, I had a student, for example, we wound up keeping her, and we worked with the parents to work out a solution for her. But we would get sometimes a student whose price tag to serve them would be over $100,000, right? Like, legitimately. But we were our own LEA, as it was called by the state, meaning we were responsible for all special education services for that student, which meant that at the time we interpreted that as, we just have to figure it out. So we did with the parent. Right. But if you're 8 million students, you have so many opportunities to create specialized and expensive programs within the system, which we do in New York, to say to that parent, hey, we actually do have a school, uptown, yada, yada, yada. We can get you busing to it. And you have so many different specialized schools. what de Blasio was doing, I think, like, who can get it in his head, but he was just wrong about the math. Like,
Right.
we now are spending more than almost any school district in the country. Like the budget for this program is more than most school districts in the country, including pretty significantly sized school districts, just for this program. And as you reported, this is not necessarily the most worst off students, right? Like, it would be one thing if this were like, hey, we're going to East New York, we're going to the South Bronx, and actually it's the kids who can't read in the 5th grade that we're throwing this money at. If that were the case, I probably wouldn't even be having this podcast with you, because I'd be like, maybe not the best use of funds. I think a traditional school district should be able to do that well, but at least they're trying to solve that problem.
Right.
But this is not necessarily the kids in East New York and South Bronx disproportionately. Who are they?
Yeah, I mean, they're students whose parents have hired lawyers. I mean, and the thing is the old process was often that you would come back to the negotiating table after a year. So there's a year we just spent $100,000 on your student, but now we're starting to figure out what to do with students like yours. And so we're going to ask you kindly, please come back into the system. We don't want to pay this much. And that's part of what de Blasio's policy was, is like, we're not going to just fight with parents every year about this. So now you have students who are just, I mean, it's almost permanent. I mean, it's $100,000 every year to that student. And as you say, New York has its own district for very special ed, for students with very specialized needs. So yeah, I mean, as you say, if there's any school district in the country that should be well set up to not have that many Carter cases, it should be New York. I mean, no one's got more economies of scale,
Right.
But they're suffering immensely from it. So
yeah, and I think Chalkbeat reported this, and I think you alluded to it too in your piece, is that these are concentrated in places like the Upper East Side and Park Slope. It's disproportionately white kids, more affluent kids, because they hire lawyers. Yeah. And this is where we are right now. And what's ironic about this situation is New York faced this past year, at the time of your writing, we've since sort of had a budget deal, but something like a $5 billion deficit across the district. If we solved this problem and just brought it back to the levels that it was when de Blasio made this change, we would have eaten somewhere on the order of 25% off of that budget deficit just from fixing this problem. Now, I'm not simplistic enough to think that you could just with a stroke of a pen solve it overnight, but you can start to solve it, start fighting these cases. And from what I understand, we haven't. Mamdani's administration, I think you report that they've kind of said something about trying to fight these. My read on this as a political observer in New York is that these parents now, I think you say it's like 100,000, are now like a perfect example of concentrated benefit and diffuse costs in our politics. So now they're getting a mega benefit. You know, Chalkbeat reported some of them are sending their kids to horseback riding as quote unquote therapy, right? So they're clinging to this benefit. If people like Mamdani now try to rip it out of their hands, that's 100,000 angry voters, which is why I'm quite concerned that we'll never solve this problem unless you have like a figure who's willing to piss off voters.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the problem, as with many problems about being about running a city or a state or a country, it involves annoying, very organized groups, right? And you have to be willing to do that. Otherwise, no problems get solved.
Right. And you also report that with all these problems, right, in funding, right, even if Mamdani, which he has not shown any willingness to, including in his last budget, wanted to cut educational spending in order to right-size it, there are some limits both that he has and the state has in cutting funding. Like he had paid lip service to I think you said it was like less than 1%. He had proposed funding cuts, and then he had proposed other increases to this, even as we're losing students and we had a budget deficit. He's proposed increases, which I think went through. But even if they wanted to cut in any given year, there are certain restrictions on this.
Yeah. So there's sort of three buckets of restrictions here. Two of them are confusingly called hold harmless, but the first level is the school level. So there's this New York City political tradition, basically, that you don't cut a school's budget. So individual schools. So if there's a school that whose enrollment has been declining, as most schools have, I think I said in the article, but I mean a quarter of schools are below 60% capacity. So those are pretty empty schools. So there's this tradition that you don't cut an individual school's budget, and that's just a tradition. Like they could get rid of it, but it's very awkward too, so they don't. Mayor Adams tried to do it. He was sued. People protested. He backed down. There's another level of this one's called maintenance of effort, but it says that the city must spend on its education department, on the whole system, as much as they did in the year before or more, unless city tax revenues go down. Which doesn't much happen because the city continues to prosper. That law was written in the 70s when the city was not prospering very much, and they were worried about this. So they made this rule that it has to go up or stay the same, or if city tax revenues go down, then it can go down by the proportion which the city revenues go down. So if tax revenues go down 5%, then they can cut the budget by 5%.
So we're kind of stuck. Right? Like the way I look at this is like, unless we have Will in Albany, we're kind of stuck with a bloated system unless we have not just a mayor who's willing to cut. Because we don't, my read on this article is that it's not that we just need to start cutting back as the revenue goes down, which is what the law allows. Like, so let's say the revenue decreases 10% next year, cut 10, but that we actually like probably could use some cuts well below that to make up for all the excess of previous years. And so as I read that, I'm like, maybe the best case scenario is just reallocating and spending the money better. We're kind of stuck with like a exorbitant per pupil expense in this city, unless we increase students, which you could, for instance, by fighting these Carter cases, you could start to bring those students back in the system. Or we have like some, the combination of mayoral courage on this issue and Albany courage on this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you need a whole lot of courage. Yeah, I mean, because there's also the third kind of hold harmless situation is that the state aid to a city also can never go down. And Hochul actually tried to change that, and everybody got very mad at her in both parties and in both chambers. So yeah, I mean, you need a lot of courage of a mayor. You need a lot of courage of a governor. You need the courage of state legislators. You need courage all around. As for reallocating within the same bucket, I think it really comes down to school mergers, and that's something that New York does sometimes. But it does seem like they could use more. It's that one requires maybe the most courage, because you're telling parents that the place they drop off their kids every day is not going to be open anymore, and they're going to have to go to someplace else, and they're going to have to make new friends and the whole lot of challenges that come with going to.
But you know what? Like, as hard as that is, sometimes fiscal challenges require us to make hard choices, and so does just competent resource allocation. But I just did a whole 5-part series on New Orleans where they do this all the time because they had to. So they've been consolidating schools, closing schools, moving schools, and showed tremendous progress over the past 20 years. And if you ask any close observer of New Orleans, that ability to close and merge schools, and they do it often for fiscal and performance reasons, is one of the main drivers of their success. And actually, if you ask Doug Harris at Tulane, who's been studying this, he says it is the driver of success more than anything else, was their ability to do what you just said.
Yeah.
But this reminds me now that the most important part of this discussion is, well, hey, $43,000, $42,000 per student. Well, if we had great results, maybe it's worth it. What are our results in New York?
Results are quite average. So it's it's a mediocre district. There's nothing to write home about. It's certainly not a terrible place where nobody ever learns anything. But it is not an above average school district. So I think it's roughly a third in fourth grade are proficient at math, and a little less in reading, and then the numbers in 8th grade are a little worse, but they're a little worse in most places. So I mean, yeah, despite spending so much more than everywhere else, they just have average results.
Yeah.
One thing, just to go back on closures actually is that I think one reason why the schools should close that I think that people don't realize is like the students there get less opportunities because there are fewer students. So it's like you may not have the same sports, you might not have the same electives, you don't have the same APs. Like it's all like going to a smaller school is not that good, right. Especially if they're getting to this under 60% capacity. These really, really getting to be quite small schools. It's not all the fun and roses that it might seem like. Oh, like it's a small school like Horace Mann or something, but like no.
And you talked about how the New York City results, when you're looking at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, is on par with Denver, which spends half as much per pupil, and Clark County, Nevada, so Vegas, which spends about a third as much. And I would venture to guess that those are not overwhelmingly more poor and high need than New York City. I hadn't looked at that though.
No, I mean, I tried to find, I tried to find, demographically similar places. There's nothing, there's nothing, no two places are identical, but yeah, they're not,
or more affluent.
Yes. Actually, yeah. I mean, students in Vegas are not rolling in it. So
yeah. Right. And they also, those are two places that have pretty significant English language learner population.
Right. That was the comparison I was going for, is like, I don't want to pick a city, that just doesn't have a lot of people who learn English.
Well, this comes also as we've had we did an episode 2 weeks ago on the Mississippi Miracle and the Southern Surge, as people call it, where certain states, Mississippi being a great example of this, in the South, have seen, especially on the very measure we're talking about, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, have shown dramatic progress. And, people can go back and listen to that episode, but the nimble use of resources and accountability is a glaring explanation here. And that is just a contrast that New Yorkers are going to have to deal with, right? Which is, and these states are in direct competition now. Not that a lot of people are going to be moving to Mississippi from New York. I love Mississippi. I spent some time there. But there are the Texases of the world and the Floridas that are trying to draw people in, Georgia. And this is a real comparison point. Like if you start to ask people, hey, you're going to have lower taxes, you're going to have better performing schools. Like you're starting to get to the point where, and it's in a more affordable city, right?
And there'll be more children there.
And there will be more. Yeah. Your school have all the different enrichment programs, right? And your school will actually be a greater representation of the diversity of our city, because we don't have all these million different ways to cut students up, including the Carter cases you talked about, but also the hunters, the magnets, the crazy zoning that we have, combined with the small schools, which means that the likelihood of your kid rubbing elbows with somebody with a dramatically different racial, economic, et cetera, profile or lower. Like you're starting to add these things up and say, well, what's the selling point in New York? Well, I'm a New Yorker. I love New York. But if your selling point in New York is just that, hey, this is a badass city where the most ambitious people are, but your rent is going to be insane. Rent in Manhattan is at the highest it's ever been. I think it's over $5,000 on average now per month for an average apartment. Now, if you've got 2 to 3 kids, that means you're probably $7,000-8,000 a year, right, for rent, which means that, before tax, you'd have to be making $160,000 just for rent.
Just to pay rent, yeah.
Then you're starting to take into account your schools, all the other costs of living. Like it is a place that is pricing people out, to say the least, and there seems to be very little in the way of solutions to this problem. And so this concerns me. And I'm curious what kind of backlash you've gotten to this piece, if any.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten some. I mean, I think the backlash really just comes down to people don't want to hear negative news about public schools
Right.
or news they perceive to be negative. It's somewhat fragile system, right? Like the only way it survives is by people thinking that it's okay,
Right.
and not pulling out their kids or not, passing some voucher program that guts it. Like the only way that it survives is if enough people think it's like a decent deal. So I think when you publish an article as I did that says like this is becoming a worse and worse deal, I think some people feel like that, like it's like I'm trying to get rid of public schools or something like that. So I think that, I understand their frustration. I understand, how one thing could lead to another, but I also think it's important for people to understand these things and understand the trajectory, right? Because the enrollment is continuing to decline and the spending is continuing to go up. So it's not like New York City schools are peaking at 42K and like it's going to be the peak. Like, no, this is the beginning,
It's going to get worse. Their projections, I was just reading that they're expecting, I think it was something like 10 to 15% more students lost over the next decade, something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And then after your article was published, Mamdani announced, I think, a budget deal. I'm not sure if that's actually passed yet, but it was kind of what I expected, and I did an episode with Bradley Tusk. People can listen to where we talked about your piece a little bit, but we talked about what we were expecting in the budget. And as Bradley predicted, it was filled with gimmicks. So it had a delay in the pension fund payments. It had a bailout from Albany, or if you don't want to classify it as a bailout, significant funding from Albany to make up the shortfall. Aid, yeah. And that it was framed so interestingly by I come from Democratic politics. All my friends in Democratic politics were tweeting, "Oh, like this is what progressive governance looks like." He inherited a $5 billion deficit from Eric Adams and balanced it. And I thought to myself, interesting use of language. Number one, every mayor has to balance the budget. So like this is the lowest of low. You must balance the budget.
It's required by law. Yeah.
Two. He balanced it with gimmicks, as I just described, the pension fund delays, the aid, right, that are not going to be there every year. And then third is, if the way we're describing this is that Eric Adams left him, quote unquote, $5 billion in a deficit, then how are we going to describe this next year when Mamdani has left himself an even bigger deficit? Like, are we going to be like, Mamdani left himself a $10 billion deficit, right? Like if that's the way we're talking about it, like he didn't balance the budget, like it's like paying off your minimum on your credit card, right? That's right. What we've done. And in some ways, I'm not even sure we paid the minimum. Like we might actually be accruing more interest than we were before. I am concerned that Mamdani and the people around him aren't embracing the language of sacrifice. And I'm, as you were researching this piece, you probably came across his rhetoric on the campaign trail, which was like nearly nothing about education, right? He said he was going to give up mayoral control, which he backtracked on, thankfully, and hasn't had a lot to say about what he's going to be doing to transform the schools, which is not surprising because if you were going to give up mayoral control, you probably weren't really thinking about what you would do. You were going to hand over that responsibility to somebody else. As somebody who's been following this, like, do you have any sense that he understands the gravity of this issue?
I mean, look, you're certainly right about the pension stuff. I mean, you're just asking a future mayor or maybe him, but certainly future taxpayers to kind of have the burden of paying for pensions. I think he's somewhat aware of these things. I mean, they asked for a class size extension. Like, I think they know that that's blowing up the budget. They say they're going to do some Carter case reform. It certainly hasn't been done yet, but it could be done, as we were talking about. So I think they're aware of some of these issues. Yeah, I agree with you. There's not much language of sacrifice, that sort of thing. But it's just really hard to say. I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of Mamdani conclusions all over the place. But a lot of them are like, oh, he's a centrist now, or he's an abundance guy now, or it's like he's this now, or he's the truest progressive there ever was. It's like, I think that we need to see, a little more to conclude.
Right. And I think in conclusion, this is where I have a problem with the rhetoric of a lot of Democrats across the country, not just Mamdani. And it's not just the extreme, like the more progressive leftist, I think encompasses most centrists too, is that there's this lack of any concreteness when it comes to education here. And there's also this sloppy language. Like when Mamdani and his supporters talked about the budget, they're setting up an impossible standard, which was they basically framed any cuts to programs as a failure. So like, we didn't have to cut anything. I'm like, actually, you cutting things would tell me you understand the problem here. Like you should have to cut certain things, right? In order to expand some things, you need to cut other things. Otherwise, the money has to come from somewhere. And there are only so many billionaires and pied-à-terres that you could tax before you run out of the money. Like, for instance, this pied-à-terre tax, from what I understand, wouldn't even have covered the Carter case reform that we just talked about. It was in the hundreds of $1 million, right?
Yeah,
so
I think it's like 500 million or something. That's the goal.
Like everybody in New York could tell you that he did that pied-à-terre tax. Fewer than 1% could tell you about the Carter cases, right?
Right.
And so this is the problem here, is that there's a lack of attention to detail on this kind of stuff. And there's also a misplaced understanding of what progressive is, right? Cutting Carter cases or increasing the litigation of them from the city side in order to decrease the amount of people leaving the system to go horseback riding is progressive. The cut is progressive. A cut can be progressive because that means that those overwhelmingly more affluent students come back into the system. There's more money to be spent, for instance, on tutors for the kids in East New York and the South Bronx, right? The same is true of the consolidations of schools, right? It is more progressive because then that one school can provide more comprehensive services to their kids.
Exactly. I mean, the schools that are shrinking the most are in the poor areas. Like this is not like,
right.
So you're talking about like getting it so that poor kids can play on sports teams. Like that's what we're, that's what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be like this, terribly evil thing of like, ripping them from their friends or something like that.
Right. Well, Marc, this was super enlightening. Thank you so much for joining us. Anything you want to plug? We'll obviously link to your article.
Yeah. I mean, the Marc Novicoff at theatlantic.com kind of. But I mean, yeah, I've Twitter, Marc Novicoff. But yeah, it's thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, everybody, thank you for listening. Remember to rate, review, subscribe. We just rebooted our YouTube, so get out there and subscribe. We'll put a link in the show notes. You could search Lost Debate. We're going to undergo a little bit of a rebranding there, but we're starting to drop these episodes on there, and we're going to start dropping sort of more finite content. I'm going to be doing an explanation on the Talarico-Paxton race, as well as a sort of primer on some other issues over the next 2 days. So you could check it out there. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube now. Thank you very much and have a great weekend, everybody.